Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After the wife flew away, the husband reflected on a past life when everything was great. Today's second part of a story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. I said, how long will it take? She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, please, I've been installing tailgates for decades. We can leave tomorrow. What are you going to do with it? I asked, pointing to the trailer. She said, can you give it to my kids? She said, sure. I said firmly, allowing no room for argument, I need to take Buster with me. She looked skeptical, then said, okay, I can get him AA certified as a guide dog. What disability should I list for you? I said, what about terminal stupidity? Then I added, I don't even know your name. She said lightheartedly, you can call me Ariadne. I understand that in Greek mythology, Ariadne was a princess. She helped Theseus escape from the Minotaur, and then Theseus abandoned her as soon as he escaped. I hope my new friend wasn't making some sarcastic statement. I thought to myself, I wonder what her real name is. The next morning, Jan Robert, his daughter Ariadne, and I packed up his things and headed up US Highway 1. Why would I do something as crazy as just disappear off the face of the earth? It was an easy decision. I knew who I was dealing with. Modern society is too dependent on computers, and the predatory forces at the top of the virtual food chain make a lot of money from this dependence. Most of them are illegal. Anyone who interferes with their cash flow can expect their wrath. I assumed that my small operation would remain under their radar, as it was nothing more than my plan to move after the divorce, but it turned out to be too successful. Cyberspace is like the Wild West, the fastest shooter dictates the rules. There is no sheriff in this town, and therefore the talented black hats never suffer the consequences of their crimes. In fact, they are basically wolves, and the rest of us are a herd of helpless sheep. The only reason any individual sheep haven't been eaten yet is because the wolves haven't gotten to them. Well, they've gotten to me now, and that's why I was driving up US Highway 1 with his new daughter, passports, credit cards, and all other paraphernalia of modern life. Requiring several days for delivery, we needed to find a place to hide. In fact, Ariadne was a real wizard when it came to everything related to conspiracy. I still didn't know anything about her, but I knew she was an apex predator. She must have had 10 ironclad identities prepared in advance, and that foresight came in handy while we waited for all the pieces of my own identity to fall into place. We decided that the mainland was too obvious a place to be found, so once all my paperwork arrived, we planned to take our first cruise out of Miami. You ask why a cruise? Can you think of a more anonymous way to escape? You're boarding a 1,000-foot ship with 6,000 happy people, then all these people land at each port like Marines on Iwo Jima. It's easy to get lost in such a crowd. Ariadne booked us a room at the Fontana Hotel. Again, it was brilliant. If you're being hunted, you hide in a cheap backcountry motel, right? These are people who have nothing to hide, staying in the most pompous place on the planet. The room cost $1,800 per night, but I'm sure someone unnamed paid for it. Ariadne had a pile of Black American Express cards to draw on. There were some minor issues at the front desk. Buster didn't fit the typical profile of a cute dog, but they had no choice when they checked his guide dog credentials. Being disabled, I needed my big, scary, smelly dog. The only other awkward moment was when we actually went up to our room. This was the biggest room they had, but there was only one bed, and I had no intention of sleeping with my daughter. Ariadne laughed and said, look at this sofa. It's wider and nicer than most beds. I'm small, I can easily sleep here. I had a gym bag full of things, which was more or less all I had. Ariadne laughed and said, you'll have to spend it on shopping today, Dad. By the way, me too. She winked conspiratorially and added, my dad can't be some guy from Cleveland, and you have to look convincing when you spend all the money you have in your accounts in the Cayman Islands. Let's meet here in the room in a few hours. I want to see a completely new you. I became completely dependent on Ariadne, so I did exactly what she said. It wasn't because I was allowing a young girl who could have been my daughter to boss me around. It was just that Ariadne was a local, and I was a stranger in this very strange country, without any prior notice, I might add. So, I would be a fool to ignore her advice. I spent the entire day creating a new version of myself and, in the process, I spent $5,000 at Ida and Harry's in blue signature. I assumed that the man I was portraying had grown up in wealth, so I totally embraced Ralph Lauren's style, high-end, understated, elegant, and adorned with a bit of snobbery. It was difficult to pay for all my purchases. I charged everything to the room, and of course, they called to confirm. They quickly learned that my purchases were backed by Amex Black, so afterwards, one of the doormen and I carried the entire purchase back to the room on 2 luggage carts. Ariadne returned to the room before me and stood on the balcony looking out over the Atlantic. I noticed that part of the closet was filled with her new clothes, and there was a pair of partially packed JW high leather rolling bags on the floor next to her. Since they matched the 2 I had just bought, I realized we had spent $8,000 on luggage alone. Who said crime doesn't pay? She surprised me when she returned from the balcony. When I left her, she was a homeless girl in a black sweatshirt. This young woman was a complete stranger. Her thick brown hair was still short and functional, but now it was styled in a sort of cone-back fashion that highlighted her perfectly proportioned and coiffed features, as well as her extraordinary jade green eyes. She had also put on makeup, and she clearly knew what she was doing. She now looked like a strikingly beautiful and extremely wealthy Wellesley graduate. More interestingly, she very clearly was not built like a 14-year-old girl. She was tiny, which made her look like a waif, but according to Harry, she already knew from the cutoff shorts that she had long, well-shaped legs. Now, in a modest sundress, it was clear that she had toned, rounded hips and small but full and beautiful chest. She blushed and said, "You don't have to persuade me, I'll still take care of you." The meaning of this statement remained ambiguous. I blurted out with deep sincerity, "No, I'm really serious. You are beautiful, and there's no question about it." By any standards, she was an absolutely spectacular little female doll. Her eyes seemed to soften the way girls do when their emotions flare, and she walked on her tiptoes in 4-inch heels that made her long, muscular legs bend in a way that a father shouldn't think about. She kissed me tenderly on the cheek, looked at me mischievously, and said, "Thank you, Daddy." God, where did she get this perfume from? We ate dim sum and Cantonese lobster in Hackensack. She was such an impeccably gorgeous little gem of a woman that she turned heads as we sat. Half the room thought she was my mistress and were very disapproving, while the other half looked at me benevolently, thinking, "How sweet, he's inviting his attractive daughter over for dinner." I said, "Maybe you should order for us, being Chinese and all." She grinned and replied, "When I work, I'm just the Red Dragon. All my ancestors are Scotch-Irish." That explained the dark brown hair and contrasting green eyes. In fact, she acted as if we had a loving family relationship. She did possessive, feminine things like straightening my tie and collecting things from my lapels. But it was not lost on me that she was perhaps the most dangerous creature in the entire Miami area, including all the local coral snakes and alligators. It was like being lovingly coddled by one of those 20-foot Everglades pythons. I didn't know whether to be happy or horrified. After dinner, we drank some truly excellent plum wine. I asked, "Where do we go next?" "Come on," she said. "Today is Tuesday. All your documents will appear here in the next couple of days. I've booked us on the first flight on Friday morning. It's on one of those celebrity cruise ships, so we'll be mingling with the crowd for 4 days from Puerto Rico to the Eastern Caribbean, ending on the island of St. Lucia. I want to get off there. I've been to St. Lucia, and it's very nice." I asked, "And you?" She looked embarrassed and said, "I'll go with you." "Why do you ask?" "Okay, all in," I said. "I really want you to come with me. I know this is crazy, considering we both live single lives on the outskirts and the only thing I know about you is that you're the Red Dragon, but I have a strange feeling that I can trust you. I trust that you are a decent person and that you have my best interests at heart." I didn't add, "even though you're a famous cyber bandito." I continued, "The longer we are together, the stronger this feeling becomes, and it's confusing where it's taking me. I'm starting to see you as a woman, and given the disaster that happened the last time I got intimate with a woman, I don't want to repeat that." She looked at me with a closeness I had never experienced from any other person in my life, especially from someone so young. Chronologically, she was only 28 years old, but then again, the red dragon was centuries ago. She took my hand, looked deeply into my eyes, and said, "For now, think of me as your guardian angel. We'll still need to keep a lot of distance between Tommy Mazer and Jim Newhouse. We can talk after we're done with this." She sat back in her chair with a smile and said, "I will be your loving daughter all this time, and I will keep you safe. You haven't heard my story yet, and you might change your mind about me after I tell it. Then we can decide what happens next." She looked into my eyes with intensity. "I'm never going to leave you unless you send me away yourself." Her eyes were sparkling with tears, and she looked absolutely gorgeous. Things were a little awkward when we first returned to the room. We both realized that the father-daughter relationship was just a cover. I, in particular, was uncomfortably aware that I was about to sleep with a stunning beauty, a situation that, under normal circumstances, might have led me to do something inappropriate. The last thing I wanted was to get involved in any kind of complicated relationship with a woman, especially someone as dangerous as Ariadne. Nevertheless, there remained an undertone of physical attraction. It would be super weird if we were actually related by blood. She disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the sounds of brushing teeth, and she came out dressed in a relatively modest yellow pajama suit made of silky material. She had worked the previous night, killing me and then resurrecting me in the official records as Jim Newhouse, so I had never seen her in night clothes. She said shyly, "I usually sleep without clothes, but that wouldn't work here." She wasn't trying to be cute at all. God, this was the last thing we both wanted, but I still had to admit that her tight little body was world-class. Petite women have the advantage of not needing particularly large assets to look incredibly nicely. Ariadne had a true hourglass shape with two perfect little buns and a full set of shapely breasts, all on a rock-solid body. She probably weighed about 100 pounds. I made a heroic effort not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice the two small dots protruding from those delicious breasts. I said with a gulp, "See you in a minute," and went to the bathroom. I came out in a pair of burgundy silk pajamas straight out of I Love Lucy. The girl from Ida and Harry assured me that these were the best fashionable clothes for sleeping for men. I wasn't sure about this since I usually sleep in boxers. Meanwhile, Ariadne made the bed in the other room and climbed inside. The outline of her hips and round fifth place in the tight silk made me say something awkward, so I quickly jumped under the covers and turned off the light. I said, "Good night." She replied, "Good night." Her voice was tense. I thought to myself, God, give me strength. My ID showed up on Thursday afternoon. It was an absolutely stunning illustration of modern identity theft. We had been hanging out like father and daughter for the past 2 days, and the role had begun to fall comfortably on both of us. She teased me a lot, and I looked at her lovingly. There was no repeat of the intense intimate desire we both felt that first night. The flight to Lizzie's Muna Marine Airport in Puerto Rico took 2.5 hours. The 10-mile taxi ride through San Juan traffic to the cruise port felt almost as long as the flight. Ariadne sat serenely, looking out the carriage window. She was wearing a pleated white skirt and a blue polo shirt that made her look like she'd spent the last 10 years in high-end prep schools rather than wreaking havoc in cyberspace. Buster squeezed between us, panting from the heat and drooling all over my new khakis. He proudly wore his service dog vest like a new Marine in his blue dress uniform. This made up for the trip to Puerto Rico in the luggage compartment. He made it clear he never wanted to go through this experience again. Ariadne was an amazing little chameleon, which probably explained her success as a criminal. She could take on the persona of anyone she wanted. For our best cover, we chose a single millionaire father with a sophisticated adult daughter. I did have a couple million hidden in numbered accounts. The 1.5 years I spent in the penetration testing business turned out to be very profitable. But I had a feeling that Ariadne could beat my account balance tenfold. Of course, we didn't spend any money. Ariadne booked us a penthouse suite on the Celebrity cruise ship. Thank goodness this particular suite had 2 single beds. It was a hack that allowed us to obtain the suite, but no one on the ship was the wiser when Ariadne overflowed the buffer in the reservation system. Cruise ships are like small towns filled with brand new strangers every week. Essentially, when landing, it feels like everyone is moving into town on the same day. On the first evening, we ate and attended one of the onboard shows. Sleeping was easy because we each had our own bed, and we fell deeper into a father-daughter routine. Buster was a bit of a problem because there was limited space for trash, but the couple of hundred who slipped into our room gave the butler access to the ornamental lawn on the upper deck. This feature was one of the reasons we chose this ship in the first place, and Buster was very grateful. The cruise itself was pretty boring. None of us wanted to risk using the ship's ultra-secure onboard internet connection. Ariadne lived in virtual space, which is why she became especially nervous. Neither of us liked to party, but I finally decided to take her to a nightclub on the ship just to blow off some steam. I wore a tuxedo, she wore a small turquoise cocktail dress that hugged her exquisite body. This sight stirred the hearts of every man present. In fact, I realized that I was sitting with a woman who was probably one of the most beautiful on the ship. Accordingly, Ariadne began to dance a lot. She rejected the first couple of offers, but the third guy was very handsome and seemed to be an all-around decent guy. Ariadne turned to me questioningly. I said, "Of course, sweetie." She stood up, walked out onto the floor, and began performing what seemed to me like a pagan mating ritual. It was a perfect illustration of the difference in our ages. I knew that what she was doing was normal for her peers. I'd seen other 20-year-olds dance the same way. The music seemed to flow into them and then flow out again, resulting in movements that would have been considered obscene in my time. But Ariadne's generation seemed to view it as a normal expression of their intimacy. Oh my God, the last thing I wanted to think about was Ariadne's intimately. I slept with her every night, but watching her dance actually helped me distance myself a little. I realized that we truly belonged to different generations. Of course, I'm also some sort of evil god personally using me as a punching bag. Most people of my generation go from cradle to grave along a beautiful, stable trajectory without any life disasters. None of this applied to me. In one night, I lost the woman I had built a life with, and just as suddenly, I found myself running from shadowy forces bent on destroying my newly built life. To make the situation even more difficult, I was assisted by a mysterious girl who looked almost 20 years old and who was perhaps one of the most dangerous women in post-industrial society. Worse, she was exotically beautiful. Given my past history with women and the fact that I was fighting for my life, I would have to be crazy to feel anything other than extreme gratitude towards Ariadne. And yet, as I watched her slow dance with this big, handsome guy, I had very unfatherly emotions. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he placed his hands on her waist, right above her round little fifth place. She leaned back, looking straight into his eyes. There was nothing intimate about it, their bodies barely touched. It's better to use the term intimate. Again, the way she danced was no different from other girls in their 20s. The problem was that the familiarity between these two gave me an irrational, incredibly strong feeling of jealousy. I wanted to be the one to hold her, and I wanted to be the one to swim in those bottomless jade green eyes. I knew this feeling was crazy. I didn't even know her real name, but here it was. Then she made things much worse. The music ended, and they laughed. She grabbed his hand and slid over to where I was sitting. I tried not to look like the green-eyed monster that was eating me alive. She said lightheartedly, "Frank wants to take me to the mast bar." "Can I, Daddy? Please, please?" I tried to sound fatherly when I said, "Sure, but you better not bother me when you come back. I'm going to sleep." She said, "Thank you, Dad," and squeezed my hand in a loving, daughterly gesture. They went together. He was my height, so when they left, they both looked like he was taking his little sister somewhere, that is, unless you counted those perfect swaying hips and the twitching of those two perfect little buns. I didn't know this was possible, but I actually felt a greater sense of hopelessness and loss than when I saw Heather kiss Wilkins before the trip. I was almost sure that Ariadne would spend the night with this guy, at least, that's what it looked like. I was surprised to hear them both laughing together as they walked down the hallway, only an hour and a half later. Of course, all this time I lay in the dark with my eyes wide open and my heart pounding, listening to the noise of the ship and the work of the engines. There was a short pause at the door, accompanied by a faint groan, and then the door opened. The light from the hall illuminated her as she silently slipped into the room. She undressed in the dark and quietly slipped into her bed. She rustled for a few minutes and then fell silent, falling asleep in the sleep of innocence. It was a very unpleasant situation. As the Red Dragon, she may pose a threat to post-industrial society, but like Ariadne, she was dangerous to my very soul. I knew that I was falling in love with her, and love and trust were luxuries that I absolutely could not afford. Heather had drained that account to zero. The next morning, I showered and dressed in khaki pants and a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. I found Ariadne in the living room of the suite reading USA Today. She wore a white tropical linen dress that showed off her trim little body and gorgeous legs. Her legs were a real work of art. I had noticed this back in her cut-off jeans and hoodie days, but in some ways, they were more special with their 4-inch heels and shiny new look. The sophisticated look seemed to come naturally to her. Her ability to don the mantle of privilege was so convincing that it was either superb acting or she actually came from money. She smiled brightly and said, "Last night was wonderful, thank you." I said jokingly, in a mockingly stern voice, "I hope you didn't do anything that Dad wouldn't approve of." She looked at me more seriously than I expected and said, "Don't even think about it." We drank and talked, and he kissed me at the door. That's all. You have to get it in your thick head that my loyalty is to you and only you. This raised an important question. She focused on me as if she wanted to make sure I understood what she was about to say. Every inch of the public areas of this ship is monitored by cameras, and each of them can be hacked remotely. I know this because I've already hacked into their system with my phone. Don't you think it would be a little weird if someone saw me turning down guys my age to hang out with my dad? While she was talking, I was thinking, devoted to me? What the hell does that mean? She added, "Besides, I want you to find someone tonight too. We'll be arriving in St. Lucia in a couple of days, and we'll get off there. In the meantime, we need to put on a credible show just for appearances." I said, "So you thought we'd get off there?" She replied casually, "Yes, my family has a place there. We can hide out there until the bounty is lifted. We need to keep you so far under the radar that they'll be convinced you're dead." I said, "Interesting. You never told me about your family." She waved it off. "If we decide to continue, I'll have to tell you." She left it up to me to decide what continue meant. That evening, we returned to the nightclub. I was in a tuxedo, and she was in a classic little black dress that ended a few inches above her knees. Those incredible legs left a lasting impression, and with pearl jewelry and black patent leather shoes, she was simply gorgeous. The hoodie didn't reveal much about her breasts, and from then on, she wore polos or high-necked cocktail dresses. This dress was cut out at the front, enhancing her breasts to stunning levels. They might be relatively small compared to the Sports Illustrated supermodels, but they were so high and tightly packed, and her chest was so well developed that her small breasts were impressive. This discovery added another drop of anxiety to my already precarious state. I'm a total boob lover. Heather had an impressive pair of breasts, and even in her chubby housewife stage, they were fun to play with. Now my guardian angel was showing off a firm pair of melons that almost put Heather in the shade. This fell into the category of cruelty to mortal men. My task for the evening was to find someone my age. I understood why Ariadne wanted me to do this. We continued to support the legend of father and daughter, and it was a cruise, so the father would probably be looking for some strange woman of his own. Ariadne easily met men. In fact, they came in droves to our table. She danced with several of them, including her friend from yesterday. I finally plucked up the courage to walk up to a table full of women who were clearly either divorcees on a girls' cruise or married women sowing their wild oats. Their status didn't matter. My only job was to find one, cut her out of the herd, and spend some time with her. They all looked at me expectantly. My name is not Clooney or Grant, but I have developed some social skills ever since Heather so unceremoniously kicked me out. There was a short, dark-haired Latino with impressive breasts, a tall redhead with a model build, and a blonde who looked like a California beach bunny from the Clinton administration. I thought to myself, blonde, brunette, or redhead, what a trivial choice. I said, smiling at the whole table, "Would any of you lovely ladies like to dance?" The blonde, who was by far the most beautiful of the three, jumped out of her chair like a shot and dragged me to the dance floor. She was still hot in some ways, about 40 years old, and probably a knockout 15 to 20 years ago. She was wearing enough gold to stock a Mayan temple and was simply beaming. Recently divorced and successful in her settlement, we booked for a while and eventually ended up next to Ariadne. My pseudo-daughter turned away from the guy she was dancing with. He couldn't take his eyes off her, desperately whipping his buns. Ariadne turned to me, and we exchanged glances. She said matter-of-factly, "Hi, Dad," all the while her legs and hips were rotating in a way rarely seen outside of primitive birthrights. My partner, who danced in the same way as me and ran like an old man, made a double conclusion. "She's your daughter?" she asked. I replied, "For the last 28 years. She looked at her again and said, "Amazing. She looks exactly like Chelsea Hughes. Her parents were my friends in Washington." Well, that little coincidence certainly allowed the skunk to break free at the Women's Bridge Club. I said, "Let's take a break for a second," and led her to a comfortable table. It didn't work because the music was still deafening, so I said, "Let's go have a drink." My partner obviously thought she was going to get lucky and became very flirtatious. I walked up to the Globe and Atlas pub. She held my hand as if we were a couple and sat down at a cozy table for two. My partner was a real beauty. The flower was a little different from a rose, but not so much that it went unnoticed. In her youth, she must have been a world-class beauty, long natural dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, and facial features so aesthetically perfect that you just wanted to hang her on the wall and look at her like a Rembrandt. The rest of her, in a tight black dress, gave new meaning to the term brick house. I assumed that the second wife's trophy had recently been replaced with a newer model. She showed me all the bouncing crossed legs and deep exposed cleavage that women do when they can't wait to get to the fun stuff. More importantly, I didn't want to set any precedents for Ariadne. If I had slept with someone, then Ariadne would have the same moral right, and the thought of some random stud driving her into a coma caused me extreme emotional distress, much worse than the week Heather spent in Paris. I kept telling myself that Ariadne was 19 years younger and that she was a legendary cyberspace daredevil, not to mention she was literally my guardian angel. None of these arguments touched my fevered brain. I couldn't deny the completely unreasonable desire to hold her and make her mine. The woman sitting across from me knew something I needed to find out. I said, "Did you live in Washington?" She replied, "My ex-husband was a vice president at General Dynamics in Falls Church. I live in Georgetown now." I said, "You mentioned that my daughter looks a lot like Chelsea Hughes. It seems like it means something to you. I'm wondering who this Chelsea Hughes is and why you remember her." My partner looked a little disappointed. She thought I was about to ask an important question. To her, no matter how beautiful a woman was, she could find many bed partners, and I was wasting her precious time if I didn't move in that direction. This was why she began to look at one of the lizards hiding in the bar, as if broadcasting, "Come save me from this nerd." But in the meantime, she answered my questions. She said, "Chelsea's father is Bill Hughes. He's a big shot in DC security." I knew Hughes. It's actually a very small community at the top, and we all know each other. In fact, in my short, happy life as a freelance pentester, I subcontracted a couple of jobs with him. A few years ago, Hughes invited my ex-husband and me to one of those low-key picnic concerts in Yards Park near the Navy Yard. Hughes and his whole family were there. That's where I met Chelsea. She's the second of Hughes's 4 children and the oldest of the children he had with his second wife. I remember her because she was such a beautiful girl. Her mother is a stunning beauty, and I was Miss Teen California myself, but neither of us could compare to Chelsea when we were her age. Your daughter is an exact copy of her. I looked with interest at the woman opposite me. This seemed to inspire her. Perhaps she mistook my deep focus for newfound passion. In any case, she added, the strangest thing about Chelsea was that she went to MIT, not a college for intelligent women like Holyoke or Radcliffe. How could such a beautiful girl find a suitable husband on a campus full of weirdos? She laughed cheerfully. Clearly, it was an inexplicable quirk on Chelsea's part that she was actually interested in nerds. At that moment, the guy she was playing eye contact with appeared and cheerfully said, "Can I join you too? You seem to be having a good time, and I'm always ready to have a good time." Subtly, I said, Of course. I have to go anyway. I need to make sure my daughter isn't kidnapped by some horny dude in a nightclub." I glanced pointedly at my new table-mate, who missed it completely. I then turned to my partner and said sincerely, "It was nice meeting you, and I hope to see you again." She didn't recognize me either. she was too busy focusing her attention on her next victim. I went outside and leaned against the rail of the ship. The Gulf Stream water boiled in a silvery cascade in the powerful wake of the ship. The night was crystal clear, warm, and fragrant, and one of the huge Caribbean moons hung on the horizon like a bright yellow plate. Meeting this woman could have been a strange coincidence, but it was not beyond the realm of possibility. It made sense that the cruise would have included a woman traveling in Hughes' peer group, as it was both expensive and exclusive. It was a bit more of a coincidence that I met someone who knew Chelsea Hughes, but this was not completely ruled out. The woman I spoke to was destined to inevitably go to the ship's nightclub, narrowing the odds to about 30-1 on any given night. So, I had a name, but there was no reason to do anything with this knowledge, at least not until Ariadne and I were able to give up the pretense of father and daughter. However, I had some useful information. In fact, Ariadne was the daughter of one of the smartest guys I know. More importantly, there were rumors that his wife was even smarter and more strong-willed than him. I heard that his wife was one of the hottest MILFs in a city that prides itself on trophy women. This explains the enormous intelligence and killer appearance of my imaginary daughter. The deciding factor, and what really convinced me that Ariadne was Chelsea, was the connection to Mitt Hughes. Mitt does exactly what Ariadne does. He's essentially a hacker, just a white hat. Based on her iconic exploits, Ariadne's hat was much grayer. However, any woman who could get into Mitt's league was clearly exceptional at everything Ariadne was good at. So, the evidence points directly to Chelsea Hughes. I returned to the nightclub to tell Ariadne that I was heading back to my room. She danced languidly with the same guy as last night, her arms around his neck, her head resting on his chest, pushed towards him. I couldn't see his hands, but they seemed to be much further down her back and perhaps resting on those wonderful buns. This was clearly more than just a pretense to sell our story. She enjoyed the romance. But of course, she was a young woman, and he was a handsome man, and the atmosphere of the cruise ship's own world makes reality seem long ago and distant. I was again overcome by a causeless attack of jealousy. God, this was getting ridiculous. I had no grievances with the girl who was young enough to be my daughter. She didn't owe me anything. She had already saved my life, so to speak. The dark forces she fought for me probably wouldn't have killed me, but they would have left me to live under a bridge for the rest of my short and miserable life. I approached the two of them. The guy gave me a pleasant smile. He actually seemed like a nice guy. Ariadne said, "Hey Dad, are you coming back to the room?" I replied, "Old people need rest, my dear. You both have fun." Ariadne said very pointedly, "I'll be back in about an hour." I said, "I'll probably get up, but if not, I'll see you in the morning." It nearly killed me to say this. I was almost certain that I wouldn't see her until the morning. As I was leaving, I saw them kissing. Ariadne was clearly carried away by the moment. My 24-year-old wife had flown to Paris and spent a week having a night with a dirty old man, and now I was losing a woman to a very handsome and completely decent guy on a cruise. I felt much worse about my daughter's lack of figure than about my wife. So, I ordered a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue on my ship's account. I didn't pay for it anyway, and I sat on the couch, drinking away my sorrows at $100 a drink. An hour passed, and I was almost at the point of wondering which side of the balcony to jump from when I heard the same cheerful voices coming from the hall. It was a surprise. Just then, there was a much longer moan, a louder groan, and then the door opened. Ariadne stood there, looking happy and excited but not at all concerned. "Thank God," she said lightheartedly, "pour me some of this, okay?" I poured her a glass and handed it to her. She plopped down on the sofa and laid her head on my shoulder. It was a gentle gesture, not an intimate in the least. She reached out and stroked my cheek lovingly. She teased, "I see you scored." I said just as jokingly, "Not like you." God, I sounded like such a pathetic little. She tensed, turned, and said in surprise, "Do I sense a hint of jealousy in your voice?" "Destroyed," I said. "In the short time that I've known you, I've begun to see you as a woman. As I told you back in Miami, this could be problematic. I loved Heather for 24 long years, if you count the courtship, and then, out of the blue, she suddenly decided to run off with some guy who was never going to do anything other than use her. I smiled grimly and continued, forget about the heartache that will result. I think you understand that this will cause trust issues. Since then, I've felt no emotions other than emptiness and deep suspicion when it comes to women. I looked at her with love and said, and then you come into my life, and everything about you becomes so beautiful and full of joy. More importantly, you chose to protect me. I didn't force you to do this, it was something you decided on your own. So it's natural to have feelings for you, to want to trust you and get closer to you. But you're also half my age, and the generation gap seems insurmountable. I winced and continued, the guy you were with tonight is perfect. He's handsome, seems very sweet and funny, and moreover, he's from your generation. The woman I was talking to is of the right age, beautiful, and cute. She's the one I would normally spend the night with, getting to know her a lot better. But all I could think about was you and what you did. I added with noticeable emotion in my voice, so I went looking for you, and there you are, courted by the right guy, the guy I would want my daughter to be with. This is a completely understandable, appropriate, and even desirable outcome for two beautiful people being together. But it just tore me apart. So yes, I guess I'm jealous of your youth and all the opportunities you still have ahead of you. Moreover, I'm jealous of every man who has the opportunity to hug you like that. She looked at me carefully, her eyes soft. Finally, she said, when I accepted your assignment, I also examined you in my own special way. It was a scary thought. A hacker as capable as Ariadne knew more about my life than I did. She could read things I had never seen, such as comments in school files, credit reports, and performance evaluations. She looked at me with tenderness and said, what I found was that you are a truly decent, honest, and caring person who does his best in the face of any obstacle. I also learned how exceptional, strong, smart, and creative you are. To be honest, I have fallen hopelessly in love with you as deeply as a woman can. Since we met, you have been everything I ever expected and more, meaning my feelings for you arose long before we met in person. Then she looked at me sharply, as if she was trying to convey an important message, and said, that's why I broke my cover and came from Boston to Corgo. You need my help, but that's not the real reason I'm here. I'm here because I believe that you are my life partner, and the women in my family choose a partner for life. She added with a flirtatious smile, what you saw tonight was nothing more than my way of relieving some of the stress you've been building up in me. It was to maintain our cover, but honestly, that's not the reason I did it. I love romance, and you can't give it to me yet, so I'm enjoying some harmless flirting with a very cute guy. Then she winked at me benevolently and said, soon you will find out what really happens when I give myself to a man. It will be nothing like what you have seen so far. I have given my soul to only one person, and that is you. This commitment lasts much longer than we've actually been together. She finished by saying, yes, you are old enough to be my father, and that may be more obvious now than it will be when I'm 60 and you're 79. But I feel like our souls match so smoothly that I know why you feel you can trust me. She added with sincerity, I tell you to follow your instincts because I will never betray you and will be your friend, companion, and lover for the rest of your days. We just sat there, looking at each other with desire. I began to reach out to her, and you could see the security doors slamming shut in her magnificent mind. She said with steely determination, if I let this genie out of the bottle, we won't leave the cabin until we're back in Miami, and it won't serve our current purposes. We'll have a lifetime to love each other the way we do. Let's convince the dark internet that Tommy Massner really disappeared. She pushed herself back, stood up, and said, by the way, if you're wondering, I just saw the most intimate I'll ever be with another man. Your attraction lies in your unwavering strength, personal devotion, and dedication, which is what I've always been looking for in a man. You can expect an equal measure of reciprocity from me. In the meantime, I think I should take an ice-cold shower and go to bed. Do you need a cold shower too? I looked at her as honestly as I could and said, no, I don't need to. What you just said brings me more satisfaction and deeply moves me than any intimate experience I've ever had. I looked into my heart and see that I really trust you. In fact, I trust you so much that I'm not going to add the usual reminder not to betray that trust. I know you won't because I know how sincere you are. I guarantee you that we will still be kicking off the accelerator when I'm truly 79 and you're only 60. You will never regret giving yourself to me. And so, the endless unreality of the cruise continued. I ran into my friend from the nightclub a few times. She was always with some skinny, tanned, age-inappropriate man. Every time we encountered her, she carefully examined Ariadne, and Ariadne began to try her best to avoid her. Perhaps my pseudo-daughter also remembered something. The last stop before St. Lucia was Martinique. Ariadne, her new friend, and I spent the day shopping and visiting rum distilleries. This seemed like a completely fatherly thing to do for my daughter and her boyfriend. For his part, the young man was a very good person. His name was Frank. He was the network manager for the Dairy Farmers Association headquartered in Kansas City. At 29 years old, he played basketball at K-State. He kept calling me sir, which made me feel a little older than Methuselah. He clearly found Ariadne very attractive. Naturally, she encouraged him, holding his hand as they walked and generally hanging onto him when they stood together. Of course, it killed me, but to my utter surprise, I found that I both understood what she was doing and, more importantly, trusted her. This feeling intensified every time Frank approached the line of intimacy that Ariadne had undoubtedly drawn. One day, he was so bold that he put his hand on her shoulder and then on one of her perfect round breasts. Ariadne did not speak to him for an hour. He addressed me, and I sat down while she sulked at a private table in the St. James tasting room. I said, "Frank is sorry, sweetie." He said he wouldn't do anything like that again. Frank loomed worriedly in the background. She gave me a penetrating and very significant look and whispered, "Remember what I told you, my body is meant for you and only you." Then she said in a voice that Frank could hear, "Okay, Daddy, I accept Frank's apology." She turned to Frank and said in a threatening voice, "This better not happen again, do you hear?" But she softened the edge of her statement by walking over and kissing Frank sweetly. He wiggled his whole body like a happy puppy. Ariadne's special little statement made me extremely excited, so I sat at the table for a few more seconds. I looked at her holding Frank's hand and chatting with him. She was wearing stylish, short shorts, clean, expensive, and modern chic. They showed off her gorgeous legs, thighs, and buttocks in a manner that was very cruel to all the horny old men in the area. Some guys might like the bird legs of a fashion model, but women with well-developed and muscular calves and thighs are irresistible to me. My ex-wife had beautiful legs, but Ariadne's legs were sculptural masterpieces. They were muscular as if she had grown up doing gymnastics or dancing, but they were too long compared to her tiny body. They ended in firm, round hips and a round fifth place that screamed both powerfully and fruitfully. She stood and waited patiently, holding her boyfriend's hand and thrusting one of her stunning round thighs forward. Finally, I took control of the situation and said, "Well, I'm going back to the ship." Ariadne said, "You and Frank can go back alone. I want to go shopping a little more." Frank said eagerly, "I can stay with you," but Ariadne said too hastily, "No, I want to explore the surroundings without a man looking over my shoulder." Any sensible guy would distance himself from a woman when she said something like that, so Frank and I returned to the ship. I knew that Ariadne was heading to the internet cafe. I was getting dressed for dinner when she burst into the room, looking excited. She said, "I just checked, they are thinking about canceling the award. Most of them think you're dead. There are still a few holdouts, but I spent some time convincing them to come around." Obviously, the Red Dragon was working in virtual space on my behalf. One of the most alarming things about my new situation was how easily I could forget who Ariadne really was. The next day, the ship took us to the city of Castries, the capital of the sovereign island nation of St. Lucia. We were just off the coast of South America, and the weather was truly equatorial, meaning there was a ton of sunshine and the sea breeze barely kept up with the humidity. The greenery was lush, even more so than in the northern part of the Windward Islands, and the smell was tropical. Our room on the ship had air conditioning. That was the reason why Buster looked at me as if I was crazy when I said, "Let's go for a walk, old man." But we were going to get off and leave everything behind, including Frank. It was a complete disappearance. I didn't pack anything, and neither did Ariadne. We could buy everything we needed as soon as we landed. Everything we had brought up to this point had been paid for by someone else, and we were able to purchase everything we needed thanks to Ariadne's special skills. So it was easy to just leave everything behind, except my dog. Ariadne's family had a villa in the Cap Estate area on the northern tip of the island, west of Rodney Bay. The city of Castries is located south and east of there. We stopped for a Creole ride in a decrepit 1950 Plymouth. It looked like he was offering a taxi and God knows what else. His name was Jean-Claude. He had a classic island accent and a fast-paced way of speaking. All the way to the homestead, he couldn't stop talking about the people who lived there. The villa belonged to 3 sisters and their families. One of them was Bill Hughes and his wife. This was already established as Ariadne was going to use it. The other 2 were sisters of Hughes' wife, along with their husbands. Jean-Claude said that he was a long-time close companion of his younger sister's husband while he was here in St. Lucia. In fact, the guy met his future wife here. The other sister was a millionaire businesswoman, and it was her money that bought the place. Jean-Claude told us that this sister was married to some mysterious character who the locals believed was working for the CIA. We arrived, and it was truly impressive. Jean-Claude dropped me, Ariadne, and Buster off at the gate. It was only a 15-foot wrought iron specimen. Ariadne walked over to the keypad, which was part of the speaker built into the right pillar. She entered the 8-digit identification code, and the gate began to open silently. We walked along a path of crushed white coral towards the house, which I still could not see through the trees. We turned the bend, and a breathtaking sight appeared before us. The mansion itself fit neatly into the side of a lush green ridge that extended about a quarter of a mile down to a 50-foot cliff above the bluest ocean imaginable. The buildings sparkled white, the grounds were lushly landscaped and perfectly manicured. The whole area smelled of flowers and palm trees, and all you could hear were the sounds of the ocean, tropical birds, and someone cutting grass in the distance below. I said with admiration, "This is really a lot of money." Ariadne replied, "This is my Aunt Mary. My mom and dad are doing well financially, but they couldn't just shell out $4 million in cash like Aunt Mary could. She bought the place out of the blue to use as a retreat to help her new husband recover. He was wounded in Mexico, where they met. I don't know the whole story and I don't want to know it, but my Aunt Millie was treating Mary's husband. She's a world-renowned surgeon, so she was the right person for this." I thought to myself, yes, the women in Ariadne's family are all as exceptional as she is. We walked towards the house with that metaphorical elephant dancing next to us. I wanted to get rid of our nasty Pam as quickly as possible, so I said, "I know who you really are, Chelsea." She didn't look surprised. She said, "I was pretty sure that recognized me. She's the ex-wife of my dad's friend. She got a lot of money after the divorce, even though she was the one who cheated." I thought, does anyone ever remain faithful? Chelsea continued, "That's right. My real name is Chelsea Hughes. I'm almost 29 years old, a MIT graduate, and I work for Motorola in Marlborough, Massachusetts. My dad's name is Bill Hughes, and my mom's name is Maddie. I'm a pretty normal girl as far as possible in my family. No one knows about my other identity, and I, of course, want to keep it a secret." I said with a smile, "You're not the Red Dragon, and Tommy Massner is dead. We keep each other's secrets." She responded with a smile, as if I had surprised her. I said, "Always together, just you and me. No people between us. We start over from here." She said, "I can't believe it. I've dreamed of this all my life. One man, one love." St. Lucia is a former French colony, so it is natural that the housekeeper was French. She greeted Chelsea like a long-lost relative. This was a completely different side of my young friend, new role, beautiful little family princess. It was strange, especially knowing what I knew about her. The princess personality was no match for Chelsea's brilliant mind or the Red Dragon's accomplishments. Apparently, Chelsea was always a beauty, someone who was a debutante. I could imagine how exhausting it must have been for her to carry all these aristocratic white glove expectations, especially for a fiery personality like Chelsea's. That was probably the reason she rebelled. The Red Dragon was definitely on the opposite end of the spectrum from the girlish identity her family had forced upon her. Finally, I asked her to tell me how she became such a great hacker. We sat on the patio in her little slice of heaven, watching the gorgeous tropical day unfold. I said, "You must have had a very hard time growing up." I suppose that was the reason you turned to a life of crime." She smiled a dark smile and said, "You have no idea. The expectations for a girl like me have always been heartbreaking." She continued with some heat in her voice, "My parents are rich, and I'm beautiful. Both of them are relatively enlightened, at least when it comes to bourgeois ideas about raising girls, especially my mother. But they just couldn't see beyond my appearance." She added with some indignation in her voice, "My older half-brother Billy, whom I love very much, flies with the Blue Angels. My little sister Janie plays on the U.S. women's national soccer team. My little brother Tom is a hacker and a miracle like me, but he is a white hat hacker. In fact, we were on opposite sides of several cases." She smiled slightly. "I knew it was him, but no one would have guessed that the Red Dragon was little Chelsea Hughes, the beauty from Georgetown. Both my father and Aunt Millie's husband are major computer security specialists. They worked with Tom all the time while he was growing up to make him who he is, but they didn't even consider working with me to be anything other than the family jewel and the perfect bride." I could hear the anger in her voice as she said, "So as soon as I got to MIT, I started studying the dark side. The classes themselves were boring and too easy, so I had a lot of free time. Plus, I had access to the entire hacker culture through the student population. I thought to myself, boring and easy? What kind of woman is she?" Chelsea was on a roll now. She said, "The more I did the hacking, the better I got at it. I started with simple little things, and it was more of a social activity. It was like a game among the students. But they were too easy, so I started doing some trivial things and professional jobs on the dark web. I loved the feeling of being a villain, and I got better and better until I eventually earned the reputation I have now," she said with bitterness rather than vanity. "I was still beautiful Chelsea and still living the preppy girl life that is inevitable in the Cambridge area, but I was doing much more intense hacking, and that took up all my time, so I stopped having a social life." She looked at me seriously and said, "As you know, the internet is a world in itself, and it was the only place where I was judged on my merits and not on the size of my 5th place. It was liberating, and I became addicted. I did everything necessary to maintain the appearance that my life was what it had always been, sweet little Chelsea going to work and occasionally visiting single girls' clubs. But my only reality was in cyberspace as the Red Dragon, and I was extremely lonely." Her gaze was thoughtful. This was the expression I wore all the time before I met her. She said, "I didn't have anyone I felt a kinship with, so I was completely emotionally closed off. That is, until I got your assignment. At first, I thought you were just a boring person with a grudge, but the more I looked into your biography, the more I began to understand who you were, how cruelly you were wronged, and how bravely you faced problems. So, I went deeper." Her face brightened as she said, "The more I studied you, the closer my soul became to yours until I developed an absolute attachment to you. It was an all-consuming attraction. Although you were still only the face of a nameless client, there was no way to contact you without sacrificing my anonymity, and I couldn't trust you enough to do so. Then my colleagues put you in danger, and I knew I had to act, no matter what the consequences would be for me." She looked at me seriously and said, "I want to be honest with you. I probably stole $400 or $500 million during my time as the Red Dragon, most of which the company didn't even realize they had lost. I gave most of it away, what I got from these adventures, to charities and people in need. I saved several million to build my nest, but I have never intentionally harmed anyone in my life, with the exception of your ex-wife and her friends. They deserved what happened to them, and I can be quite medieval when someone I love is hurt." She gave a short glance of satisfaction, as if remembering something particularly pleasant, like a nice lunch or a fun day at the beach. It was amazing. I realized that even before we met, I was important to her. Her ability to empathize with me through the events of my life was a far more amazing achievement of intelligence than her known abilities in cyberspace. She grinned darkly and continued, "No one will ever catch me because I'm a ghost. Cyberspace is convenient, face-to-face, and anonymous for people like me." I already knew that, but she laid all her cards on the table, and it seemed important to me to let her finish her confession. She said proudly, "Everyone thinks that the Red Dragon Revolution is a conglomerate of hackers in China. Even the most astute investigator would never guess that the entire organization is actually just a 28-year-old girl living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I completely understood what she was saying. Thanks to 256-bit encryption and an infinite number of proxies, it is absolutely impossible for a hacker of her caliber to ever be caught. However, Chelsea's hacking didn't bother me any more than her intimate history. That was in the past, in a different context. Now she chose to be solely devoted to me, and this choice was the basis of my faith in her. You really can't love someone if you don't trust them. Trust is built on a shared history of life decisions, and these decisions are driven by each person's ability to understand and care about the impact of their actions on their partner. For 22 years, Heather and I were more or less on the same page. Then she lost that connection. This fact was evident in her harmful behavior. This lack of empathy led her to make one very bad choice, at least as far as I was concerned. In fact, her inability to make the right choice was the main reason it was so easy for me to leave her. On the other hand, there was no doubt that Chelsea and I were on the same page in understanding and personal respect for each other, so I was confident that when faced with any choice involving me, she would choose wisely. Therefore, it was absolutely clear in my mind that I could trust her. I said, "Okay, I know how you got here, and you obviously know how I got here. So what are you going to do next?" She looked at me lovingly and said, "I will be your lifelong companion and lover. This will continue until we have children, and then we will also become parents." She paused and looked at me seriously. "I know you've been a wonderful father. I also know this is a second chance for you. Unfortunately, so I'm ready to raise our kids without much help from you. I come from a big family and I love children, so I want to have 3 or 4. Chelsea's assumptions were logical. Moreover, they showed how much she cared about me. I was there and I actually had all the parent t-shirts, but Chelsea did not understand that she was offering me a revival. The first time, I did everything right, got married, had children. This aspect of my life had been very satisfying. Then the fruits of that labor were taken from me by Heather's Paris adventure. After the inevitable divorce, I felt like my entire life on this earth had been wasted. Then this beautiful little angel dropped out of virtual space and created a truly new beginning for me. Essentially, I was allowed to relive all the satisfying experiences of my past married life and perhaps not make the same mistakes. My relationship with Heather was the typical ill-considered, hot-blooded coupling that every normal child goes through. This time, my beautiful Chelsea and I were going to discuss all the conditions and agreements. Her obvious personal integrity and intellectual confidence reassured me that I could discuss sensitive issues with her in a rational manner. I knew that after this, I could be sure of her absolute devotion, but I needed to put my cards on the table just in case. I said, "Are we talking about marriage? If so, then I have 2 conditions." Her face darkened. I knew she expected some classic, stupid rules from me. I said, "First of all, I want you to leave the red dragon. He's already caused enough trouble in his life, and I don't want the mother of my children to spend the rest of her life in a supermax prison." Her perfect face lit up. I added, "And I never want us to misunderstand each other. As soon as one of us has a question or problem, we should discuss it and resolve it, no matter how sensitive the issue is. I have a feeling that I would still be married if my ex-wife had told me about her insecurities earlier. Oh yes, by the way, I have no regrets since I have seriously improved my situation with you." She laughed modestly, and I continued, "But there can be no misunderstandings or secrets in a happy marriage, and I want to make sure that we are always on the same page with each other. So you must agree to bring up any problem you face and make sure we solve it, even if it means digging through the process a little." She nodded eagerly as I said this. "Looks like you have something to say?" I prompted. She said with a huge smile, "Of course I agree with all of this, but more importantly, when do we move on to the consummation of the marriage?" I stood up to face her, and she rushed towards me, one arm wrapped around my neck and the other pulling me down into a passionate kiss. For a moment, I said to myself, "She's only 28, I know I think too much." Then she make a sound. My brain told me I heard that same noise in the corridor of the ship, and I had an instant feeling of unreasonable jealousy. Then the rational part of my brain told me to shut up. Her mouth was wide open, making passionate little screams, and it was obvious she wasn't going to let go of my neck anytime soon. So, I picked her up Fabian style. It was easy to do, as she was as light as a feather. I carried her across the patio and into our bedroom. All bedrooms faced the sea along the entire patio area. Our door was open to the ocean breeze, so I carried her to the bed. Meanwhile, she grabbed my neck, kissing me hard. Part of me had to be aware of the navigational issues because she was clearly lost in her passion. My last thought was, if smart girls are passionate, then Chelsea Hughes must be the smartest girl in the world. I carefully removed her hands from my neck and threw her on the bed. She lay there completely helpless, her intelligent green eyes clouded with lust. She was wearing one of her light linen sundresses, which was bunched around her waist. It was obvious from the twisting of her hips and constant screams that I better get to work, otherwise, she would start without me. I was planning something more romantic for our first time together than Wild Jungle Night. Looking at the magnificent beauty lying next to me, I believed her, trusted her, and knew that through her, I was going to be reborn as a new man with no regrets. We spent a couple of weeks enjoying the peace and tranquility that only great wealth and luxury can bring. The night was wild, more like a romance than married life. We made love like a young couple, of course. Chelsea really was young, energetic, giving, and tireless. I, not so much. We both accepted that an age difference was inevitable. She had to get used to the fact that I was 47 years old, and I had to adjust to the unbridled freedom from complexes that her generation enjoyed. I benefited from her enthusiasm, but I was clearly not as young as before. This didn't bother Chelsea at all. She took greedily but gave no less, and it was absolutely clear that intimate was simply her way of expressing love in physical form and not an absolute goal in itself. So if I couldn't make it to the start of the fourth lap, she would just lie there hugging me with the most aesthetically pleased expression on her face. The fact was that Chelsea was a different person than Heather, much deeper emotionally and simply smarter. Most significantly, although the night was great, it was secondary. It was simply a byproduct of our incredibly powerful sense of identification with each other and attraction. In many ways, we were both recreated as a couple by our union. This reconstruction was literal in my case. The records are stored on computers, and someone with Chelsea's skills can make you into anything they want, sometimes even against your wishes. My new incarnation was interesting. I became a millionaire venture capitalist who invested in many humanitarian projects. My extensive social media profile was a masterpiece of deception, as well as the necessary trail of documents. The Red Dragon painted me as she saw me, simple, loving, decent, and honest. But even my ex-wife would not have recognized the active, sophisticated bon vivant that Chelsea created with a little help from Photoshop. My photos required some changes due to my past life. I'd always been the faceless face of the hacker community, but everyone who knew me in my past life still remembers what I look like. So, a supposedly dead person who keeps popping up on Facebook might raise questions. I disappeared into the sea. At least that's what the investigative notes Chelsea posted said. I boarded a small fishing boat and went several miles out into the Gulf of Mexico to fish and was never seen again. Thomas Miller Mirror was duly declared dead. I had decent life insurance, and between paying out my 401k and selling the trailer, both kids turned out okay. It's not their fault that their mother went crazy. I still follow them on social media. We decided to get married in a small ceremony at the estate. Since I was a fictional character and her large extended family would never understand, we decided to keep the event just between us. A justice of the peace and a couple of paid witnesses, one of whom was the ever-present Jean-Claude, were the only participants. Since my personal story was a product of creative writing and not factual reality, we needed some time and space between my full arrival on this earth, the fictional story and all, and the Meet the Parents event. Chelsea was part of a loving family group, and she was their crown jewel. Her sudden and unexpected marriage would raise concerns, questions neither of us wanted to face, especially the question of who this dirty old man was. Therefore, for now, we agreed to keep our marriage a secret, just like the Red Dragon. The wedding night was no more wonderful than any other night because it was impossible to improve upon perfection. This caused an instant mental breakdown. It was hard for me to believe that I could be so happy. Heather left me to my own devices, and this wonderful woman revived me to a life of peace, tranquility, and love. It seemed impossible that odds had come together against our alliance. I was 19 years older than her. I had gone through the grinder in my first marriage, and the last thing I wanted was to trust one of these liars again. In her real life, Chelsea was the original fairy tale princess, preppy debutante with stunning looks, a great mind, and the Scarlett O'Hara lifestyle. And, of course, much more alarmingly, she was also a sinister global figure feared by every CEO of every greedy corporation in the world. There was no way that we could be right for each other, but we were getting closer. We did it on a level of consistency that was so deep and connecting that I just knew we would never be apart in this life. The reason was simple: we both wanted the same thing, to spend my life with the only like-minded person. We were both committed to this proposal. Chelsea saw and understood our compatibility while turning my life upside down. She was wise far beyond her years, and her decision to be mine happened long before she actually met me. I felt that same sense of agreement almost immediately. This happened even as she maneuvered to get me out of the dark web's clutches. I couldn't admit it yet, but at least I was smart enough to realize that Chelsea was not Heather. So, I was able to put all my preconceived notions about women aside and start making a commitment. In my own mind, I knew I would never regret it. This is because it is the soul, not the packaging, that matters. I missed this important point the first time, but my new wife's loving and deeply caring spirit simply spoke to me. As she pulled back the blanket, she said, "Welcome to your life, my love," and then pressed her gorgeous little body against mine. I responded with absolute gratitude. "Thank you for giving her to me, my love." Chelsea was sitting at her desk in our office. My wife could be shopping online or taking down a global corporation. Given her special skills, you never know what might happen when Chelsea sits in front of a computer. Little Brooklyn sat nearby, giggling. Brooklyn is only 5 years old, but I get the impression that her mother is already introducing her to a brave new world. I have never had a hard time accepting the fact that my beautiful little wife can bring absolute hellfire and damnation to anything or anyone she chooses. I knew going into marriage what she was capable of, but I also knew that Chelsea had the moral integrity of an archangel. In my own way, it just so happens that her views on what is considered proper retribution may be a little Old Testament. She doesn't like bullies or people who take advantage of the helpless, so every now and then she has to release the red dragon to even the odds. This is nothing more than a hobby for her, but it's also the story of my life. Some people's wives win cooking competitions. Mine is a mysterious global superheroine. She is a passionate woman, and I understand her desire to right some really gross injustices. I feel the same way, but while ordinary husbands may hear about injustice and think, "I wish I could do something about that," my wife is one of the few people on earth who can actually get a little revenge, even if it might accidentally overthrow some third world regime in the process. More importantly, it's not just Chelsea's decision to release the red dragon. We carefully consider the justifications and consequences and weigh the benefits together. It may seem like lynching, but we always act together. This is another example of how close we are to each other, and I have to tell you that I get great personal satisfaction from watching my stunningly beautiful wife cut through the godless with reliable and fast sort of digital calculation. Overall, I'm a happy and contented person, and Chelsea is the perfect wife, even when she's saving the world. We decided to settle permanently in St. Lucia, so we bought our own complex closer to Donkey Beach. I won't go into detail about how it was paid for, suffice it to say that we divided the expenses through several numbered accounts. You believe it, right? Enough time passed, and we decided to hold a Meet the Parents event. Sooner or later, this had to happen, but this timeline was radically accelerated by the fact that Chelsea was already 3 months pregnant. I was very nervous. It was obvious that I had robbed the cradle, and standing next to my tiny, already obviously expecting wife, I felt like the most depraved weirdo in the world, especially considering that her mother was only 2 years older than me. Her mom was probably the hottest gilf in the universe, completely different from her daughter. Chelsea is 5'1", small-boned, and has an exquisite figure. Chelsea's mother is only 5 inches taller, but she has the body that every teenager dreams of. She has a Chelsea hourglass figure, exaggerated wide hips, an incredibly thin waist, and huge breasts. Plus, her mother exudes sensuality, while Chelsea looks cool and intelligent. However, they both share the same boundless intelligence and fortitude, and I also know they have the same inner fire. Hughes and I had never met, so I wasn't worried about him recognizing me, but at the same time, it was eerie to meet someone from my old life. Both parents were amazingly understanding. They seemed to be experiencing the same thing, meeting and marrying someone who was not a likely partner. We had a story prepared that Chelsea had provided, lots of circumstantial evidence, a fairy tale worthy of Cinderella, including charity balls and whirlwind romances in Boston. It would stand up to scrutiny, but of course, it was complete nonsense. It didn't matter anyway. All Chelsea and her mother, Maddie, could think about was the impending birth of our little girl, whom we decided to call Brooklyn. Maddie clearly loved children so much that she would probably be happy even if my wife were killed by a turkey. As a result, she and Hughes immediately moved into our estate to stay close to their granddaughter. My impression was that Hughes had little say in the matter. Having a baby was a life-changing event that I felt repaid me for all the suffering I went through at the hands of Heather. I loved this precious little bundle beyond human logic. She had thick brown hair and all the beauty of Wilson. More importantly, she was my special angel. My life would be dedicated to making her life happy. Looking at the two of them laughing together, my wife and my child, I was overcome by my usual neurotic trait. It was too much happiness. I told myself, things like this don't happen to people like me. Then my rational mind kicked in, and I thought with some irony, the life of every normal person is much longer than he imagines, and in the end, everything can be fixed. So if you stay in the game, make the right decisions, and take action with determination, you can change anything. The thing is, all my hopes and expectations didn't disappear when Heather betrayed me. Instead, I found better ones. Admittedly, this required a lot of luck, but I realized what I wanted as soon as Chelsea appeared in my life. More importantly, I acted on this knowledge with purpose. So if there is a moral to my story, it is this: your life is shaped by the choices you make, and you have no choice until you die. When the right opportunity comes, you need to take advantage of it and hold on with all your might. This simple wisdom has become the true foundation of my bright and wonderful new world. What do you think of our second part of the story today? I thought this part had the most controversy, and that's what hooked me, to be honest. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.